All right, so like a few of these videos, I'd like to share a couple of quotes with you that I found interesting. One of the most common is clothes make a statement, costumes tell a story. And then the other one I think is really interesting and absolutely true. Costume design allows you to do a different type of research and create characters, whereas in fashion, you create an image and clothing for the masses. I do think that costume design, which is obviously what I'm talking about now, or what we'll be talking about now, is something where you get to research and do a lot of the things that you can to help aid the production. Now, there's a few elements of costume design that I want to go over here really, really quickly, but it's definitely the most personal visual element on stage. I mean, obviously, it's connected to a character and how it's worn. If the shirt's untucked, I mean, all kinds of things can help you tell something about the characters. For instance, the costumes can help the audience understand relationships with people. I'll show you some things in Domestic Tranquility where you can definitely tell the criminals from the family. So you establish a time and a period. Anywhere from, I mean, you talk about it, any period you want to establish. You've seen some movies that will have different periods. The Great Gatsby had some incredible, whether it's the older version or the new version with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's got some great costumes that indicate the age. And also, it can aid the actor by indicating age, social position, and economic status. I can't tell you how many times I have seen characters kind of come together. Especially, I mean, they're going along really, really well, and run-throughs help and that type of thing. But then when you get them in costume, it's almost like it really aids them in the particular character. Now, perhaps someone, if you're doing 1950s, which we did in Domestic Tranquility, we'd actually use a girdle that would hold them up straight. And so it made them stand a little bit straighter than what they normally would, or what a person of today would normally stand. So costume design can do those things. One of the things I'll show you real quick is it can help develop character. So like in Domestic Tranquility, you've got several of the family members here, and it helps illustrate the family. Even the criminals have their same uniform, different ways to help tell you about the characters. And then as you look at the family, you can tell a little bit about them. So I'll kind of go through them one by one. So the first one then is, as you look at Tony, and Tony is a former two-bit boxer who turned to a life of crime after failing his postal exam. So he looks a little bit like a boxer in that particular picture. And then you've got Spot. And as what you know about Spot is that Spot is a large, ill-mannered thug with a huge black birthmark around one eye. So they don't give a ton of description about him, but if you look at the movie and here, it just helps you illustrate who that character is. And obviously, the crook's name was not Spot in the movie Desperate Hours. And then you look at Ethel. Ethel is definitely a very contented housewife, or at least she comes across that way. That picture can at least tell you that, or at least she really tries to be. She listens to, it even says in the script, innocuous instrumental music on the radio. She loves that kind of music, so it's basic, it's bland, it's 1950s, kind of the way the family starts out. As you look in this picture as well, it tells you a little bit about Herbert, and Herbert is described as a mid-level corporate executive. Herbert likes his life, his wife, his daughter, and everything else he's supposed to like. He's pretty standard. There's nothing that he really gets out of the ordinary. He just wants to be middle class and not totally noticed. The next one then is Cindy. Kind of helps you in that picture, helps you maybe just a little bit. But Cindy is describes her as just 2 days short of 18. Cindy is cute and adorable. She dresses and acts properly like a good girl. So that's definitely in the first act. In the second act, she starts to dress a little differently. So maybe a little bit more on the wild side in some respects. So she's pulling up her sleeves. She's actually wearing a leather-ish skirt. And you also look at Ethel and Herbert and the scene where they're in bed. And definitely you've got Ethel, who looks like somewhat dressed like the Lucy of the era of the 1950s, and Herbert has very standard pajamas, and they actually sleep in two separate beds. So even as they change colors out of their uniforms, the criminals do, as you saw in an earlier picture, also Lou changes as well. And you look where he's gotten those clothes, and it almost matches, in a lot of ways, the 1950s thug or 1950s. I mean, he's a tough guy who speaks the accent of someone raised on the streets. And Humphrey Bogart played that role, and a lot of things we did as far as that character, was developed through his physical actions, was developed through him creating that character, and those costumes really helped him develop the character. So some of the responsibilities then of a costume designer or a costumer is determine the dramatic groups in the play, obviously the people that go together. You draft a costume plot, you determine the number of costumes that you need, and you sketch a shape or silhouette for each costume, and then you create a color scheme. You also will draft and render a costume plate for each costume, choose the fabric and accessories for the costume, and supervise the construction and fittings of costumes. Now, we had a recent graduate who actually came in and helped us last spring doing Godspell. And he had only had a couple of years experience in the costume shop because he'd never done it before. And he came in and helped us out and did Godspell. So one of the things that we went with for Godspell was a circus theme. So you can kind of see some of the renderings or the plates that were for each costume or each character. And the circus theme has been used several times, at least I didn't direct this show, but in the interpretation that we had, that it took place in a really poor circus, a really second-rate circus. And it's not people, there were some people who took offense because it's based on the book of Matthew, and it's all about love, but it's really about this love and acceptance and the things that Jesus taught are available to everyone, even, in this instance, the lowest of low. Even the lowest circus performer has that benefit of getting that particular gift. So as you look at them in detail, you will see that you've got the character drawn there, basic costumes of how they want them to look, and then little scraps of clothing to give an idea of how the clothing will go together and what works for each individual character. So as they find it, they put that together so the director has something to look at before they actually build the costumes. So, Sam to the left was a trapeze artist, and then to the right actually is Ethan, who actually is my son, but because he's almost 6'5", they decided to make him the man on stilts. So some of these costumes helped with each individual character. So as you look at how they looked, basically when the costumes were finished, you can see they came pretty close to what their sketches were. Fairly close. There were some changes, obviously, to certain things, but as you look at it, they came pretty close to what they were from, left to right is my son Ethan, the tall man. I mean, you've got Adriana, who was the lion tamer. And, it kind of goes through from the muscle man to the trapeze artist to, all kinds of different characters in there. And then when we were, taking pictures for Facebook, we used some of these things. So a lot of the elements that a costumer gets to work with are line and silhouette, color, fabric, the accessories. Accessories can definitely make a character and sometimes really, really help that particular character. I think of a lot of times we talked about acting and giving props. Well, the accessories can really help make a character. You can see people, become something different or be a different fashion just by their accessories. Makeup also helps, and then hairstyle helps as well to really establish character, especially when you're talking about a period piece and getting the hairstyles. So, obtaining the costumes are really a process of building and making them. A lot of what you saw in Godspell, in fact, every costume that you saw was built by a student designer. Or you could pull it, which means you've got it in stock, and you've got some things. We have a storage area that we keep some costumes in. A lot of times we'll borrow if we need to. We might borrow from, UCM helps us out quite a bit, and we try to reciprocate. We try to give them costumes, but we've gone to different places, maybe some place that has done a show that we've done in the past, or they've got certain period costumes. It's usually not something easy where you can just go to one school and get every single costume, but you might borrow certain things that are just easier to borrow if you know someone has it. You could rent as well. There are huge costume shops that will rent you costumes. We did the Crucible many, many years ago, and in the Crucible, we rented the costumes. But still, you would think that would be easy for a costumer. But when you're renting, you actually have to, they never come the perfect size, even though you send them the measurements. You do have to, alter them. Or you could buy, maybe often from a secondhand store. And we do a lot of those things. We'll actually build something out of things that we bought at secondhand stores, which really is a lot of things that they did with Godspell. Some of the parts were built and made for that character, and other parts were taken from different costumes or different pieces that we had throughout our costume shop or bought at a secondhand store. Now, some problems then as we finish this up with building costumes is a lot of times there's a lack of patterns for period shows. So sometimes the costumer or costume designer has to make their own, and they'll go by it looking at pictures. And the other thing is time. It really takes, for most costumes, on average, a costume about 10 hours per costume, especially when you add in, there's at least 2 to 3 fittings for a character, and you're building, altering, adjusting, doing whatever to a particular costume. So it takes a lot of work. I think the biggest one we've done here at State Fair Community College was Young Frankenstein as far as costumes were concerned. And there were about 25 actors on stage, yet each actor probably had an average of 4 to 5 costumes. There was somewhere in the range of 140 to 150 costumes that were in roughly a 2.5-hour show. So that, in a nutshell, is costumes. I didn't want to take too long, but I wanted to give you a basic idea of what it's like as far as building costumes for characters and get you an idea of how to respect their work, because costume designers are incredible. Costumers who build are incredible, and I think they're great people that do, especially good ones, do some great work.